and honored to be among you for this important occasion. I am also glad to be back in the ecumenical circle because in my last 2 decades of retirement, I have been a bit distant from what is going on in the heart of the ecumenical movement. But I have been on my own way, in my own way, thinking and writing and reflecting on issues that pertain to ecumenical, to the heart of the ecumenical agenda. So I hope that my contribution will be complementary to what has been offered so far. There is more politics than theology in my presentation, so this might provide you with a little bit of uh, uh, spice. In my article, The Abraham Accords Undermined Much Needed Peace with Palestinians, the main point is in the title. The key word is undermined peace. The accords are marketed as a peace plan, but what is really happening is the escalation of tension in the region. The insertion of the name Abraham implies promotion of reconciliation between religious communities. In reality, the accords reinforce Shiite Sunnite rivalry and the distance between Jews and Arabs. At the grassroots, there may be love affairs at the top between the kings and between Netanyahu and at the echelon, but not at the people's level. And that's what really confuses the world when they see the popularity of the Abraham Accord. They say, well, they're making peace, so how can we oppose it? How can we reserve it? But it is not at the bottom, it's among the elite. The basic rationale of the accord is too simplistic. Iran is portrayed as the main source of instability in the region. Unfortunately, the Islamic Republic in Tehran is not alone in destabilizing the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, Russia, and the US are equally responsible for the ongoing turmoil. Israel does stand out as a disturbance factor because it has introduced the nuclear defense strategy to the region in the 1970s. It has acquired the nuclear bomb to preserve an occupation and continue a process of ethnic cleansing. In updating my January 3 article, I would mention a few recent developments. Number one, the role of the Biden administration, in one word, it is minimal. Biden is improving relations with the Palestinians, but his efforts are largely symbolic. Economic assistance is palliative. There are no concrete efforts for the resolution of the conflict in the new administration. Talk about two-state solution and a caution against unilateral action from either side, that means the Israelis and the Palestinians, is only talk. So far, there is little recognition in the US State Department of normalized occupation. What is really being normalized is not relations, but occupation. Is looking like it's okay now. It's so the department, so there is little recognition in the US Department of a normalized occupation of Palestinian territories. You don't hear now anymore about the territories as being occupied. It's disputed land, of ongoing settlement expansion, of annexation in the Golan Heights, and of preventing Palestinians who live in Jerusalem to vote in their coming national elections. They are not allowed to vote. So far, we don't know. Biden is too troubled with domestic issues to prioritize Palestine or to challenge Israel's hardline supporters in the Congress, in the US Congress. Ironically, now, the perceived threat from Iran to the US pales in comparison to the threat of domestic terrorism. The Americans now are less frightened from outside than from inside. And that's a historic shift that we all need to tremble about. But there are some signs of hope for diplomacy in the new administration, though feeble. The US team dealing with Iran and Israel-Palestine have new promising leadership. It is encouraging to see Robert Malley, for example, as the envoy to Iran. I don't know how many of you know about Robert Malley. Look him up. He's a promising guy. But Mali's hands are tied by the regressive political climate within the government on the issue of Palestine. Mali reports to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who has close commitment to Tel Aviv. On other issues, Blinken might be quite balanced and sensible, but he looks the other way on the issue of Palestine. Number two, what to expect from Israel's national March 23 elections. This fourth round of elections within the past 2 years will not change the character of the state or its leadership, which is moving to the right day by day. With or without Netanyahu, the Palestinian problem is no longer a central issue in Israeli politics. Malheureusement, as we say in French. Settlements expand on Palestinian land, blurring the line between occupation and biblically assigned Israeli sovereignty. Number three, Israel's intimidation campaign accompanies the Abraham Accords diplomacy. There is a growing campaign to stigmatize criticism of Israel. Critics are charged with anti-Semitism. We're all now, as we're talking, we're all being labeled as anti-Semitic. And my son-in-law is Jewish. I love Jewish people and I love Arabs, and I am an international citizen. And that is what a Christian should be. Okay, with or without Netanyahu, the Palestinian problem is no longer a central issue. Okay, now we are number three. Israel intimidation campaign accompanies the Abraham Accords diplomacy. There is a growing campaign to stigmatize the critics. Many states in the US already criminalize the ban, divest, and sanction activities on US campuses. This is the only fruit that is flying now. The only bird that is flying is the civic creative approach to the BDS movement, and it's being attacked. There is also an Israeli-led campaign against the International Criminal Court, which is considering investigating Israel's record in war and occupation. And in rejoining the UN Human Rights Commission, the US cautions the UN body not to obsess over Israel's record. The Abraham Accords have emboldened the occupation, not limited as purported. Number 4, what about the Palestinian role after the Abraham Accords? The Palestinian Authority is rushing for elections in May 22 and July 31st. The former date is for the parliament and the latter is for the presidential race. The elections are more of a circus than a race, given the Abbas machinery of electoral manipulation. Unfortunately, Palestine's leadership has failed to unite. Anger toward Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas intensifies at the grassroots level among Palestinians and among scholars, young scholars, women scholars especially. Abbas declared elections unexpectedly. After 15 years of an electoral freeze, a new cycle of election is declared. Prospects of a new leader emerging through the ballot box are currently dim. There is talk about Mandela-like figure in the presidential candidacy of Marwan Barghouti. How many of you know Marwan Barghouti? Marwan Barghouti. He is in an Israeli jail, sentenced for 5 lives. And ironically, intramural living may protect him from assassination if he were to win. Few promising leaders have had a natural death among Palestinians. They seem to be assassinated often. If Barghouti runs, he is likely to win. If he wins, he will be a game changer. But Barghouti as president is too threatening for both Netanyahu and Abbas. Israel in particular is not interested in facing a strong and popular Palestinian leader. The phenomenon of Mandela in Palestine requires a counterpart, a Willem de Klerk in Israel, but there is no such figure. Short of a totally civil approach in resistance to the occupation, it is difficult to achieve Palestinian political liberation. So far, if you make polls, you unfortunately find Hamas still popular. They will not win the elections, but they are still active, and that is drawing back the Palestinian cause. Hamas's insistence on armed struggle facing a superpower in the region. As for number 5, as for the Persian factor, the Iranian factor, Iran is also emboldened to press for intervention in the region these days. Iran's regime has survived the limitless sanctions. The hardliners in the parliament are on the rise in Tehran. They resist negotiation with the West. There is serious talk for the US to return to the Iranian nuclear deal, but neither Washington nor Tehran has yet come up with a formula of simultaneously ending sanctions and returning to acceptable levels of uranium enrichment. Any progress on US-Iran relations will positively affect the Palestinian question. After the accords, Israel's influence on the US negotiation with Tehran has declined. Netanyahu is losing status in the Biden regime. 6. Any relevant changes in the Arab Gulf? Question mark. The Saudis are not in a position to join the Abraham Accord anytime soon. The Gulf Cooperation Council is back on the scene as a reunited regional body. There are some JCC gestures of reconciliation with Iran. Iran is also anxious for dialogue with the Gulf Council. This track of diplomacy has great potential on regional harmony and on the Palestinian question, but it has not matured yet. Tehran-Riyadh reconciliation is the low-hanging fruit for regional conflict resolution. It takes vision. It takes vision to see real peace possibilities. Number 7 and the last, a final note. In short, there are no signs of hope to stabilize the region in the short run. The Abraham Accords are on target in taking a regional approach to peace, but they have missed two critical components in the resolution of conflict. Number one, the occupation of Palestine and Saudi-Iranian relations. The Abraham Accords is ignoring the central issue of Palestine and reinforcing tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran instead of trying to solve that major regional issue that is affecting everything. US policy in the region has to change to deal with the Middle East as an integrated unit. Patchwork diplomacy with isolated accords, peace here and war there will not work. The world is rapidly changing. Recurring worldwide spread of pandemics, global warming, water shortage, nuclear power, cyber terrorism, and uncontrolled social media, all these 21st century scary trends point in one direction, the need to respond to problems collectively and across borders. Thank you.